I'm joined in studio now by our I24 News senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran, as well as international affairs analyst Dan Perry, former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the rundown this evening. Dan, South Sudan denying this report, but does it indicate that there is movement perhaps on these plans to voluntarily displace, however you want to call it, the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip? At this point, 2 years in, why have no countries agreed to take in any of the Palestinians who actually do want to leave, even if it's not the forced migration?
I know of no country in the world that's eager to receive Palestinian immigrants in general. And I know of no country that wants to collaborate with what will be perceived in the international community as an ethnic cleansing of some sort. No one's going to buy that once you've trashed the Gaza Strip and rendered it unlivable, the people who then flee it as refugees are voluntarily emigrating. Now, if Israel wants to assure that no one's going to believe this, then they need to work with South Sudan, because I doubt there's ever been one person in the world that has voluntarily emigrated to South Sudan. Could it be that they might agree? Sure. I mean, they're a war-torn country. They have 60 ethnic groups or so already. What's another? They can possibly be bought. And if this comes with American money or with Israeli assistance of various kinds, or with legitimacy for its government that lacks legitimacy, basically, I don't rule it out. But this is not going to be a solution for 2 million Gazans.
Just because they agree to it doesn't mean the Palestinians would agree to it.
If Israel, will Israel force them out and airlift them? How? From where? I mean, there's no airport in Gaza. It's difficult to see how this works. The general assumption has been that if the Palestinians flee to anywhere, it'll be across the border to Egypt. And perhaps this is a way to calm the Egyptians, because there's great agitation in Egypt about a scenario where anyone contemplates the notion of the Palestinians arriving en masse in Sinai. And there's even some fear of a scenario where the Palestinians try to rush the fence and the Egyptians start firing on them. It's extremely delicate and attaches to Israel's need to somehow mollify the Egyptians, who for a long time now have not had an ambassador in Tel Aviv, and calm them down despite the war going on.
And as far as Palestinians, because as Dan just mentioned, from one war-torn area to the next, it's not the most enticing offer. I know earlier in the year you had been speaking to some Palestinians, Ariel. What do they say about this perchance that they would be relocated to South Sudan?
Yeah, South Sudan is not at the top of their preferred destination list. If you were just to tell them they could go to the United States, Canada, Australia, they'd say, where do we sign? At least the majority of them. But if we're talking about countries like South Sudan, Somalia, even Syria, some have thrown around, that is just not as enticing. And so if you ask them, they would not, at least most of them, not, if we're talking about not forced but voluntary displacement, they wouldn't volunteer to go to those places. But ultimately, even I think all this discussion is really an attempt by Israel to either issue a smokescreen or divert the discourse. These plans are not feasible, neither logistically nor diplomatically. Egypt will be the first one to step on their heels and just not allow this. Same with Saudi Arabia, the entire Arab League. And I think in the current diplomatic atmosphere, also European countries would support that call against the voluntary displacement of Gazans. I don't think these talks are real. These plans are not going to be executed. And I think this is just a tactic on the part of those who are leaking this to try and shift the conversation over to that.
One quick important thing, if Israel wanted this to be viewed as not completely illegitimate, they'd have to clarify that we're talking here about temporary refuge and whoever goes will be allowed to come back.
I am curious about the significance of senior Hamas official Khalil al-Hayya in Cairo. Dan, the fact Cairo, Egypt versus Qatar, all the mediators, but are any of them reliable mediators that can actually push Hamas to the negotiating table, or are they eager to come to the negotiating table because of this threat of IDF military pressure?
I think we see a number of things coming together, and I think they are reliable mediators because they have a real interest, in particular Egypt, that needs the war to end, no less than Israel or the Palestinians do. What's come together? It's very interesting that Israel is now leaking that Netanyahu has finally woken up to the advantages of a full deal, getting all the hostages at once. Surely he's not blind to the fact that that attaches to an end to the war. Now, Israel needs the war to end in a manner that doesn't leave Hamas in power in Gaza. And that brings us to the second thing that happened. And it was, ignored by a lot of the media. Unfairly, the Arab League 2 weeks ago called on Hamas to disarm, not just to hand over Gaza to the PA, but to disarm. I am very sure that that will be on the table today in Cairo. Egypt was leading that. Qatar signed on to that as well. So the pressure on Hamas to agree to disarm and probably for its leadership to be exiled will be very great. And the screws are really tightening. And the sides tightening the screws here are mainly the Arab negotiators. So I would even suggest that the timing of the announcement that Israel has, that the army has approved the Gaza takeover plan, could be part of this. Note that despite the speculation that maybe Israel will speed up the process, what we've been hearing is that it would likely happen in October. Now that's either a plan to enable Hamas to booby trap every building and give them time, or it's an effort to tighten the screws. It would be very bad if Israel ended up actually invading Gaza City and saddling itself with 1 million people who probably won't flee, that it will have to house and educate and feed and give health care to. That's not something Israel really wants. But if somehow Hamas agrees to disarm, that could be the tripwire that sets in motion a lot of great things. If Israel only got out of its own way and agreed with the world demand and the logical imperative that the keys Hamas hands over are handed to the PA. Right now, Israel's government continues to send its spokesmen to various studios to argue preposterously that the PA is even worse than Hamas, that the PA is imperfect, but it's the less bad option that's available.
All right, a big question still certainly remain as far as the day after in Gaza that you are alluding to, Dan. Meanwhile, today in Gaza, for the first time since the October 7th massacre, Hamas will be on the United Nations blacklist of groups that use sexual violence as a weapon of war. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is adding the terror group to the annual report on conflict-related sexual violence. Just 1 month after the Dina Project published the most extensive evidence to date of the systematic sexual violence during the October 7th massacre, as well as against hostages held in captivity. But Guterres has also issued a formal warning to Israel, saying it too could be added to the list over allegations of sexual violence by Israeli security forces against Palestinian prisoners. And Dan, I would just love to hear your thoughts when it comes to the United Nations somewhat finally acknowledging what Hamas did.
It's a step in the right direction and way overdue and not nearly enough. I think the United Nations is an important global government of sorts that has legitimate ambitions to do good in the world, and it's a shame that they undermine their credibility with this kind of scandalous outrage that puts Israel on equal footing in one way with Russia, the obvious aggressor in a truly genocidal war in Ukraine, and in another way, somehow on equal footing with Hamas. If they have any evidence against Israel, and of course things happen, and security prisoners may be mistreated, let them present the evidence. And absolutely, Israel should prosecute to the full extent of the law, and there is rule of law in Israel. There is no rule of law in Gaza, and I would like to see the UN cease its ridiculous equivocations.
It certainly seems maybe a step in the right direction. Dan Perry and Ariel Osran, great to have you with us.